Buenas tardes a todos. I'm Jason Marzak, Director of the Agent Orange Latin America Center at the Atlantic Council. I'm so delighted to welcome our keynote speaker, U.S. Ambassador to Guatemala, Bill Popp, who joined us from the embassy in Guatemala City. Ambassador, great to have you with us today. Also joining us is Adrian Arsht, Atlantic Council Executive Vice Chair and founder of the Adrian Arsht Latin America Center and the Adrian Arsht Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. Adrian, I know how appreciative this audience is of your commitment to the issues that we will be discussing today. Also joining us is John de Blasio, Chairman of DT Institute. John, thanks for your great partnership with DT on this crucial work in Central America. Today's conversation marks the launch of our second policy brief with DT titled Combating Corruption in the Northern Triangle, Prioritizing a Whole of Society Approach. It's a partnership with DT that is a result of multiple consultations with the Atlantic Council's Northern Triangle Advisory Group, a group of mostly regional stakeholders who provide high-level and local insight and recommendations for addressing critical policy issues. And importantly, today's conversation comes just ahead of Vice President Harris's trip to Guatemala and Mexico in just 2 weeks. She met last week with an all-women group of former Guatemalan chief prosecutors and top judges to discuss justice and anti-corruption in Guatemala, all part of her spearheading the administration's engagement with the Northern Triangle, with the goal of offering, as she has said, hope to citizens in the region and improve the conditions that are currently forcing them to leave. Addressing pervasive and longstanding corruption will continue to be at the top of the agenda. It is the most enduring impediment to fostering long-term stability and prosperity in the Northern Triangle. And it's an issue that this administration has prioritized from the get-go. And our publication, and as part of our ongoing work in our Center of Central America programming, we focus on actionable recommendations for the Northern Triangle and for the United States to help to reform judicial systems, combat graft in public procurement, and confront illicit financing of campaigns, all so important. I also want to thank and acknowledge the members of our Northern Triangle Advisory Group participating in today's conversation, alongside Patrick Ventrell from the State Department's Western Hemisphere Bureau, Claudio Mani of Democracy, Transparency, and Justice in Fusayas in El Salvador, Edgar Villanueva of the U.S. Guatemalan Business Council, and Carlos Hernandez of Association for a Fairer Society in Honduras, who is also a co-author of the publication being released today. It's now my great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Bill Popp to the virtual Atlantic Council. Ambassador Popp, who has served as U.S. Ambassador to Guatemala since August of last year, is a career diplomat, having previously served just beforehand as charge at the U.S. Embassy in Brasilia. He was also director of the State Department's Office of Regional Economic Policy for the Western Hemisphere. And importantly, Ambassador Popp is an excellent representative of the United States in Guatemala at such an important time. A reminder, this event includes simultaneous translation and will be live streamed via our social media channels. So with that, we invite you to use our hashtag #ACCentralAmerica to join the conversation online. And Ambassador, I pass the conversation to you.
Thank you, Jason. It's a real honor and privilege to be able to participate in today's discussion. I just want to start by thanking the Atlantic Council for pulling together such a great panel and having this important conversation at this moment. Obviously, we in the U.S. government are working very closely with partners across the board to strengthen rule of law and address corruption and impunity in Guatemala, and these types of conversations are immensely valuable. So I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to participate today. As you noted, and as I think we all know, strengthening rule of law is really fundamental to ensuring citizen security, creating an enabling environment for job creation, addressing the root causes of irregular migration, and to really help Guatemala build a more prosperous and secure future. And as a close and long-standing partner of Guatemala, the U.S. government is very strongly supporting and working with partners across the board on anti-corruption and rule of law efforts. As was noted, President Biden and his administration have been working on this from day one. On February 2nd, he issued an executive order calling for the preparation of a strategy specifically to address the root causes of irregular migration. And in this strategy, the president directed that, among other elements, combating corruption and impunity and strengthening democratic governance, as well as advancing rule of law, had to be key components. And so now, as we prepare for Vice President Harris's visit to Guatemala in the coming days and her role as in leading the United States' focus on addressing root causes of migration, we are working very holistically to address a range of issues, including, of course, the immediate humanitarian challenges that confront Guatemala and the region, including COVID-19 and the impact of the tropical storms at the end of last year, fostering economic opportunity, fighting organized crime and drug trafficking, assisting with climate adaptation, addressing gender-based violence, supporting the inclusion of indigenous LGBTIQ people, Afro-descendants, and above all, and essential to all of these efforts that I've listed, is fighting corruption and strengthening the rule of law. So what are we specifically doing in the area of anti-corruption and strengthening rule of law? First, we're supporting Guatemala's efforts to disrupt and organized crime and transnational criminal organizations. And that includes everything from capacity building and information sharing to helping strengthen the actual activities of Guatemalan law enforcement. And we're doing that in part because not only is it homeland security and strengthening efforts against these criminal activities, but crime of this nature is fueling challenges around rule of law, and organized crime is fueling corruption, not only in Guatemala, but across the region. The cooperation that we've done together is bearing results. We've had record number of arrests for extraditions. Just since the beginning of the year, beginning of 2021, we've had 25 such arrests of individuals involved in organized crime and transnational criminal activity. There's been increases in seizures of drugs, reduced flows through maritime and aerial lines. And so we are having results through greater cooperation in this area. And that in turn reduces the fuel for corruption and the threats to institutions that are responsible for enforcing rule of law. Secondly, we are partnering to address the hurdles that exist to attracting investment in Guatemala. One of the most pervasive impacts of corruption and lack of transparency is impediments to doing business and to creating the jobs in the formal sector and good jobs that can reduce poverty and create opportunity in the long term. So how are we doing that? We're working on a range of issues, and just as a few examples, digitalization, using digital technology, particularly with institutions like Guatemala's tax authority, making processes more transparent, more technology-based, less hands touching the papers, makes for less potential impediments to transparency. Likewise, in terms of port security and efficiency, one of the bigger challenges that many companies face is in terms of getting products in and out of Guatemala's ports. And that applies to US companies, other international companies, and to Guatemalan companies. And so we're working very closely with Guatemalan authorities to strengthen port security, strengthen efficiency, and increase transparency in that space. Thirdly, we're working to build the effectiveness of government institutions that are responsible for enforcing law and fighting impunity. That includes the Presidential Anti-Corruption Commission that President Giammattei launched in January of 2020. It includes working very closely in training, equipping, sharing information with Guatemala's public ministry to help increase access to justice in particular. One of the important achievements in this area over the last year has been establishing for the first time ever the presence of the public ministry and prosecutors from the public ministry in each of Guatemala's 340 municipalities. This is a commitment that dates back to the 1995-96 peace accords. And so this is a major step forward in terms of increasing access to justice and in turn rule of law. We're also working to robustly support the Special Prosecutor Against Corruption and Impunity, known as FESI, which remains one of Guatemala's most effective tools for prosecuting corruption, as well as the Office of the Prosecutor Against Corruption. So our assistance is working to institutionalize knowledge and skills, that help in terms of investigation and prosecution of crimes involving corruption, but also other areas as well as human smuggling, gender-based violence, environmental degradation, all of which are part of strong rule of law. We're also working with Guatemala authorities to place one-stop integrated service centers for particular types of crimes, including the high level of violence against women, and specifically helping to provide legal services and ensure 24-hour assistance to women and children who are victims of violence. We've worked, as I mentioned, in the tax area to help support innovative models of using technology, both in areas such as tax and customs, but also in the broader judiciary to help address tax, customs, and other financial crimes that can be very complex, but that again can erode rule of law and particularly impact the enabling environment for business. We've also worked in the area of forensics, helping to increase the utilization of scientific evidence to enhance and augment and increase the number of prosecutions and convictions, rather than just having to rely on witness testimony. So there's a lot that we're doing in that space of using technology and better processes to increase rule of law. Finally, another example is working with the courts in particular. The Constitutional Court has been a partner and an institution that we've worked with closely in recent years. Between 2019 and 2020, we worked specifically on establishing an electronic case management and digitization of processes effort, which that alone has reduced the backlog of cases in that court by over 85%. So we're working in a range of areas of assistance, but we're also using legal tools that the U.S. Congress has provided to raise awareness and accountability around corruption and rule of law. As corruption and rule of law are an issue not only for Guatemala, but they're also for U.S. national security. And indeed, we continue to work in these efforts to ensure that there is prosperity and security in the region, and that the public sectors that are responsible for supporting prosperity and security are able to meet the needs and expectations of Guatemalan citizens. And so we've used a series of tools to date that the U.S. Congress has given us, including visa ratifications. We've had several of them over the last year, which are essentially tools to be able to deny access of corrupt individuals to the United States to either hide their funds or benefit from their illicit activities. We've also used global Magnitsky sanctions. In April, for the first time, we designated corrupt actors in Guatemala using the anti-corruption provisions of the Global Magnitsky Act. Looking ahead, there are additional tools and efforts that we can use. The Section 353 report is oftentimes referred to in the press as the Engel List, is actually a new mechanism that Congress has established to ensure that individuals that are involved in corruption or that are undermining democratic processes or institutions can be publicly identified and prohibited from travel or taking refuge in the United States. And that is a tool that is going to be used in the coming future. Likewise, the Biden administration has been very clear about looking at opportunities to examine more cooperation, particularly with prosecutors in the region for deepening in investigations and prosecution of corruption and corrupt acts. So that's an area that we're going to continue to expand our cooperation with the goal of supporting rule of law and transparency. But obviously, in addition to what we're doing as a government and what we're doing with the Guatemalan government, we really need a whole of society partnership. And that is happening, and we want to continue to build that. So in addition to the assistance that we have on a bilateral basis and the legal tools we have that I've outlined, we're also looking to work with partners beyond government to fight corruption, to address transparency, to strengthen the rule of law. And that includes working with the U.S. and international private sector. There's been some great initiatives that have come through a range of entities and mechanisms, including the Association of American Chambers of Commerce, where they've worked on new ideas to utilize digitization and technology to, again, make processes more efficient, to strengthen the institutions that are responsible for those processes, and to reduce the potential for corruption. Here in Guatemala, the private sector has been working closely with the Guatemalan government on the Guatemala Does Not Stop initiative, which has a pillar around rule of law as a key component for reactivating and growing the economy, creating jobs through transparent processes, through ideas around judicial sector modernization, and for making Guatemala a more enabling environment for business. Finally, civil society must continue to play its critical role in highlighting transparency and speaking out about rule of law issues, developing critical proposals in areas from the judiciary to the civil service, public procurement, and more. So we're very engaged with working across all of these lines of partnership. And we want to, again, I want to personally thank Atlantic Council for today's session. This is the exact type of cooperation and support and partnership that we need to highlight the essential role of rule of law and anti-corruption efforts in generating greater prosperity, security, good governance in Guatemala. And I also want to just underscore again that the commitment of the United States is very strong in this area. We are going to continue to work with all Guatemalan sectors and all stakeholders to support the continued strengthening of rule of law in Guatemala's future. By joining forces, I'm very confident that governments, international partners, civil society, and the private sector, together we can construct a better, safer, and more prosperous future. So thank you again for today's discussion. I look forward to hearing from our great panelists that we have today, and just thank you again to the Atlantic Center for convening us in this very important conversation.
Thank you, Ambassador Pop, and the Atlantic Council looks forward to continue working with you and all the great work that you're doing. Thank you for that very thorough overview of all the work that you're doing and for the commitment, the passion that you have for the region and Central America. Thank you also so much to everyone who's joining us from all corners of the world. Please prepare your questions for our panelists. I've already seen a couple trickle in. We're very excited. You can either use the Q&A function in the Zoom chat, or if you're joining through another platform, you can use our hashtag AC Central America. I also want to use my powers as moderator today to encourage all of you to download the brief that we're launching today, titled Combating Corruption in the Northern Triangle, Prioritizing a Whole of Society Approach. We'll drop it in the Zoom chat for convenience. I'm also very pleased to be joined by our expert panel today to unpack this very complex issue of combating corruption in the Northern Triangle. It is without a doubt, public corruption and weak rule of law are two of the most persistent and longstanding challenges for strengthening democratic institutions and sustaining inclusive economic development in the Northern Triangle. I want to quickly introduce our panelists, and then we'll dive into the fun part. First, on my screen to my right, I have Patrick Ventrell. He's a senior Foreign Service officer, currently the director of the Central America office at the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs at the State Department. Patrick, I read that you've been with the Department of State for almost 2 decades now. That's true commitment. We also have Claudia Umaña, who's the first ever female VP of the Salvadoran Foundation for Economic and Social Development, known as FUSADES, a Salvadorian think tank that is ranked among Latin America's top 10. Claudia was also a public servant for almost a decade, working as Director of Trade Policy at the Ministry of Economy of El Salvador, and was also Special Ambassador for Trade Negotiations. I then have Edgar Villanueva, who is co-executive director of the U.S.-Guatemala Business Council. He's also part of its board of directors. Before joining the council, Edgar was an advisor to the Guatemalan Minister of Labor, and prior to that, he was DCM Chief of Mission at the the Guatemala Embassy in the United States. Last but not least, Carlos Hernandez is president of the board of directors of the Association for a Fairer Society and of Transparency International in Honduras. Carlos has helped with designing public policies on all things corruption. He's also president of the Transformemos Honduras Coalition and is on the board of directors of the Alliance for Peace and Justice. Carlos, bienvenido. Patrick, let me start with you. We just heard from Ambassador Pop about key issues and ways that the U.S. is working in Guatemala to address the issues of corruption. I'm interested in hearing how the team at the State Department has been working with the White House and other agencies to implement anti-corruption efforts in the region while working with leaders in the private and public sectors on other things equally as important, I would say, such as lack of opportunities and violence.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Maria Fernanda, for the question. Buenas tardes a todos. I think I'll answer in English just so I'm as clear as possible. Look, as Ambassador Pop noted, this area is a top concern for the Biden administration, for the U.S. government, and something we're taking very seriously. Obviously, as we look at our root causes strategy, there are a number of different elements as we develop our approach to all three countries. But this area is really at the center of it and really at the core of it. And so I think what you heard the ambassador outline, and I can talk about a little bit more, is that there's been a long-term generational investment of the U.S. In local institutions, in going after counter-corruption, and yet we're frustrated that it continues to not only be a widespread problem, but in fact, we've seen some significant backsliding in recent years. And so I think what you're going to see in as we roll out our strategy in coming weeks and months and work toward it, we're going to continue to support people on the ground. We're going to continue to build up local capacities. But I think you're also going to see, as the ambassador noted, the use of some of our own U.S. tools, because I think a missing element has been that, there are times for U.S. national security reasons and for our own interests where we may need to take some action on specific cases where there's either a nexus for the U.S. Or we need to take action. And so, as the ambassador mentioned, we've done some global Magnitsky cases. I think you'll see more in the Northern Triangle. Certainly visa revocations, including the 7031C permanent visa bans that we've done on some former corrupt officials. And then as he noted, also this 353 or Angle list. That's a list that's going to be coming out in June, but it's not a one-time list. We will continue to update that list as new information becomes available to us. And it doesn't mean that it will be a complete and final list. As more information becomes available that meets our own review standards to be included on the list, we'll update that. And that includes visa bans as well. So we're trying to do that as a way to jumpstart the process a little bit, to support people on the ground, because we know there are champions of counter-corruption in all these countries. And I'm really pleased to be on this panel with a number of them who I know and have met in person and warmly welcome their work. And we're going to try to help their work on the ground. But I think for better or for worse, the U.S. is going to have to use some of these tools. And we really appreciate that the Congress has given them to us, and we plan to robustly use them. And so we're not doing this because what we're trying to do is deter future behavior and empower local allies on the ground. And that's why we're going to use these tools.
Thanks.
Thank
Patrick.
you.
Edgar, in the policy brief that we just launched today, and that you were a part of the consultations for, we identified 3 priority areas for the United States and the Northern Triangle to work together. One is, and as was mentioned before, reforming the judicial system to strengthen the rule of law and reduce impunity. Number 2, combating corrupt practices in public procurement. And 3, confronting illicit campaign financing. 3 quick fire questions for you, rapid fire questions for you. 1, how can the private sector in Guatemala partner with the United States to tackle corruption more effectively in key areas? 2, what would you say are some of the incentives that the Guatemala private sector needs to become an even more active partner? And 3, most importantly, are you meeting with Vice President Harris when she goes to Guatemala?
Well, third question first, I hope so. I hope that there's a meeting with private sector actors in the agenda. I think that if there's a strategy to move forward on creating economic opportunities, it only makes sense that we we do a meeting and we try to get that ball rolling. On the US and private sector in Guatemala cooperation regarding corruption, I think there's a lot of room to work, and there are things that could go forward positively. This would not be working out of a vacuum. For example, entities like CACIF have already launched papers like the one called Contributing to a Better Future, where they present an analysis and proposals on improvement and reform of public accountability, of civil service, of electoral and judicial systems, and procurement laws. It also, I think very importantly, contains an acknowledgement that things are not perfect and that we need a whole of society approach to generate strong institutions and to propel development. I don't have enough time to get into every one of the aspects of the paper, which I think is very important, and I encourage Washington, D.C.-based stakeholders to take a look at it and take the recommendations serious. But I would like to present three things that I think will help us move forward faster. The first one is we should all agree on a clear and pragmatic objective. What are we trying to achieve? Without that objective, we will go back to issues where we've made mistakes in the past and where we are not facing our objectives first. The second one is building local institutions and local institutional capacities is key to move forward. I think that we should all have a vision that by the end of this engagement, which should not be that long, local institutions should be able to take care of things by themselves without any cooperation. The US has been playing an important role in Guatemala in that, and I think can continue to play a good role, especially in the areas of technology and capacity building within units at the tax administration, investigative units at the judiciary, and also units that can help improve transparency. And I think the third element to a more effective engagement is constant communication and consultation, especially to enhance the application of lessons learned from the past. Believe it or not, this is my third Central America US initiative in the same context of spikes in migration. And believe it or not, I am less than 40 years old. So I've been here, I've seen this movie, and I believe that we've failed at consulting throughout the process. We've done a good job at preparing strategies while consulting with civil society and the private sector, but we haven't maintained the mechanism that allows us to understand and to assess if what we're doing is having the desired impact, which I believe some of the results that we've seen shows that we are not. And finally, Maria Fernanda, to address the issue of incentives, I think we need to be very creative and realistic about the needs of businesses of all sizes in order to direct our strategies towards an impact in these needs. And I want to highlight something that Ambassador Pop mentioned, which is the digitalization of government services. In the case of Guatemala, I think we have four main sources of corruption: the tax administration, customs, licensing, and procurement. All these areas could be importantly impacted if we have a digitalization agenda that is robust, bilateral, and that we continue to work on. The most important thing here is that most of the companies that face issues with these four areas are small and medium corporations. And often these challenges appear when these companies are starting to grow. So if we're not only killing the entrepreneurial spirit of building something and growing it, we're also getting them out of the economic equation, which I think is not the way to build the future in the bilateral agenda. So digital tools should be part of the top of our bilateral agenda.
Thank you, Edgar. Very helpful. And I'm sure we're going to come back to those themes later on. But now I'm going to switch to Spanish for a second and bring in Carlos. Carlos, has sido un líder anticorrupción en Honduras desde hace muchos años.
Carlos, you've been fighting corruption in Honduras for a long time, designing public policies. You've been advocating for transparency. You also participated with Edgar and Claudia in discussions and consultations that we held for purposes of launching the brief that we're launching today. So my question is, how can Honduran civil society ensure that any anti-corruption policies pursued in partnership with the United States and anything instituted as a condition for assistance from the IDB or the IMF or the World Bank are going to include monitoring and evaluation mechanisms?
Thank you.
Y es justamente a reducir el espacio
There is a
cívico.
trend which is to reduce civic space in the region, and we are seeing this very clearly in neighboring countries. I believe one of the very important elements is to defend the civic space. Number two, also to recognize, and I believe this is truly important, the actions undertaken by the United States. Right now, the United States is recognizing that civil society plays a key role in development, but also in reducing the corruption risks in our countries. One of the actions that actually is absolutely vital is to strengthen the political support that civil society needs in our countries in order to guarantee that public policies are successful. And I want to mention one that has actually been successful in Honduras. Honduras had the highest homicide rate in the world, and there was a joint action with the United States and in the international community, together with civil society. We started a whole crusade to try to reduce the risks, the corruption risks, and we still have corruption in the police. However, we managed to reduce significantly corruption, and as a consequence, the murder rate. At the time, it was, like I said, the most important issue in different spaces. It was discussed at all levels. So I believe that joint efforts, coordinated efforts with the United States as well as other partners is absolutely possible. And then we have to see, how do we guarantee that the IMF, in Honduras, we've been working very closely with the IMF, guarantees that that they include provisions that are not general, like sometimes happens. Provisions are specific to make sure that they demand that the government be transparent in the use of the resources, not only in resources that come from international partners, because there's a trap there, a little perverse. Sometimes we have very clear mechanisms in place in order to guarantee the transparency when it comes to external resources, but there is no monitoring to make sure that national resources are used with the same level of transparency. Therefore, if we manage to coordinate the cooperation from the United States, Europe, international development banks that are mobilizing a lot of resources after the pandemic, and in the case of Honduras, also after the 2 natural disasters, and we coordinate all that with civil society, I think we will manage to be successful because we've done it in the past. We will manage to attain sustainable policies to mitigate, to reduce corruption risks that at the end of the day are the ones that subjugate us to a very difficult situation. Thank you, Carlos. I would like to remind
we're connected that we have simultaneous translation for this event. So you'll see that at the bottom of your screen in your bar. Muchas gracias, Carlos.
Thank you, Carlos. Claudia.
I want to turn the conversation to El Salvador, where as recently as the beginning of this month, we saw several actions from the executive and the new legislative assembly that have raised concerns among various organizations and the international community. Claudia, what is the road ahead for civil society and the private sector in the current situation in El Salvador, and what support is needed from international and US partners to protect the rule of law and strengthen democratic governance?
Thank you for the opportunity. And well, basically the road has become steeper. Many beacons of light have been damaged, and the polarization is right now the driving force, not good governance. On May the 1st, the president, a very popular president, launched a self-coup by using a supermajority in the legislative branch. In a swift political maneuver, his congressional allies basically replaced all of the Supreme Court justices that had their term up to 2027, disregarding the constitutional procedures, also illegally removed the Attorney General with his actions. Loyalty is right now prevailing over independence and merit. Amongst the early steps of this new Congress was the approval of a law that basically exonerates of all responsibility the public procurement procedures related to COVID-19 pandemic. In general terms, it's a free pass for impunity. Let me tell you, President Bukele seems he's really concentrating power. Right now, he has very few government institutions that can control his actions. He has the support of the armed forces and the national police. So with the three government branches, he can disregard efforts regarding the anti-corruption agenda and form an opaque government. So it seems like popularity and marketing strategies will prevail over accountability and transparency. So right now, I think that the document that has been put forth this morning has great recommendations, and we can navigate with them under these troublesome conditions. USAID cooperation will work very closely with civil society, and together we can form this anti-corruption agenda, but having a long-term and a holistic approach. Basically, let me tell you, we've been working on transparency for decades now. And with the help of the USAID, we were able to create the law, the Freedom of Information Act of El Salvador, and an institute that was a beacon of hope. But unfortunately, right now, this institution has been co-opted. Basically, I think for civil society, it's going to be very important just to get information. And we need to create mechanisms to promote independent information that can help analyze reality. And on this side, I think digitization, just as my other colleagues were saying, is a key element. The document says it, and I think that we can use new technological tools and also to, in the end, what the Northern Triangle people want are better services. We need to get closer so that the average citizen has quality kind of life, so that they don't go away and pursue migration as a way to have a better state. So I think that the document also has great recommendation, but the general aspect is that we need to help that the international community has zero tolerance for corrupt practices, and initiatives such like the Magnitsky laws and Engels list are very powerful mechanisms. Hopefully, we can all work in recuperating trust. And I think that in regards with the private sector, it is very important to maintain healthy doing business environment where integrity matters. So the recommendations regarding the OECD principles for corporate governance and compliance mechanisms can be of great guidance.
Thank you, Claudia. Looking at the time, unfortunately, we don't have much time left, but Patrick, I'd like to ask you one of the questions here from the public, asking about how is the US government defining success in their approaches in Central America, and specifically, how is the USG defining success with regards to corruption?
Good. Well, thanks, Maria Fernanda, for that question. And success is something that it's something we've looked in our foreign assistance sort of. So we try to measure results. Can you measure them? There are some measurements you can do, but at the end of the day, and I think this goes back to what Edgar said a little bit, we're looking for institutions that can deliver. and not only deliver, as Claudia mentioned, the services that everybody want, but deliver justice in a way that is equal and fair and just and serves the citizens' needs. And so I think that's something that there's a little bit of an intangible to it, but people know, and I think people on the street in any of these countries know when things are being done fairly. And so there is an intangible aspect to it, but I think at the end of the day, we'll know we've achieved success when we have local institutions that are serving that aspect. And until we get there, the United States is here to help using not only cooperation, but other tools that we have at our disposal to try to get to that goal.
Thank you, Patrick. I also want to thank you, Edgar, Carlos, Claudia. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We could discuss this for hours, but I now want to pass it on to John de Blasio, who's the chairman at DT Institute, close partner of the center. John, thanks for being here today and for all of your support to our work and the Atlanta Council more generally.
Well, thank you, Maria Fernanda. I want to thank the Atlanta Council for this partnership. It's been a great partnership, and Jason and the team have been great to work with. This is a very important region and a very important issue today, and working on improving and driving positive change in the region. Someone mentioned, that this is their fourth migrant crisis that they've experienced, and that's really not what should trigger our involvement in the region. We have a common geography and and common interests in a dedicated and concerted effort to working to improve outcomes and livelihoods in the region. So I'm very excited about the report that's been filed and published today. I encourage everybody to download it and to put it out there on their social media and promote it. It's got some great insights. Thanks very much to all the other participants today, and to Adrian Arsht for founding the center there at the Atlanta Council. And we look forward to an enduring partnership and moving to phase 2, which will have us in the region and promoting these ideas.